Hello and welcome to our channel. We're excited to have you here as we explore the life and legacy of one of Africa's most enigmatic leaders, Robert Mugabe. Born in a small village in what was then Southern Rhodesia, Mugabe rose to prominence as a passionate freedom fighter, leading the charge for his country's independence from British colonial rule. His journey from a determined revolutionary to Zimbabwe's first prime minister and later president is a tale filled with immense ambition and significant achievements. However, Mugabe's story doesn't end with his rise to power. His nearly four-decade-long rule was marked by significant controversy, economic upheaval, and human rights abuses that left his legacy deeply divided. For some, he remains a symbol of liberation and empowerment for Black Zimbabweans. For others, he is a figure synonymous with oppression and economic mismanagement. Today, we'll unravel the many layers of Robert Mugabe's life, examining the key events that shaped his path, the policies that defined his tenure, and the profound impact he had on Zimbabwe and the world. From his early education and involvement in the liberation struggle to his contentious land reforms and ultimate downfall, Mugabe's story is a rich tapestry of triumph, ambition, and tumult. So, join us as we delve into the complex and controversial history of Robert Mugabe. Let's begin. Robert Gabriel Mugabe. He was the third of 6 children in a family that understood the value of education and hard work. His father, Gabriel Mugabe Matabiri, was a carpenter, and his mother, Bona, was a teacher. The Mugabe family faced the daily realities and challenges of life under British colonial rule, where opportunities for Black Africans were severely limited and systemic discrimination was widespread. Despite these hardships, young Robert stood out as an exceptional student. His dedication to his studies was evident from an early age, and his academic prowess did not go unnoticed. He earned a scholarship to attend Kutama College, a Roman Catholic institution renowned for its rigorous educational standards. It was here that Mugabe's intellectual curiosity and discipline were further nurtured, laying the foundation for his future leadership. Upon completing his education at Kutama College, Mugabe's thirst for knowledge led him to Fort Hare University in South Africa. Fort Hare was a significant institution for many future African leaders, providing a fertile ground for intellectual and political awakening. It was at Fort Hare that Mugabe was first introduced to Marxist ideas, which would later profoundly influence his political ideology. The university was also a hotbed for the broader African liberation movement, exposing Mugabe to revolutionary thoughts and the shared aspirations for independence and self-determination across the continent. Mugabe's time at Fort Hare was transformative, not only academically, but also politically. He engaged with peers who were equally passionate about ending colonial rule, and these interactions helped shape his vision for a liberated Africa. This period marked the beginning of Mugabe's lifelong commitment to the fight against colonial oppression and significant political activity. The nationalist fervor was palpable, and Mugabe, with his articulate speeches and sharp intellect, became a key figure in the struggle. His involvement deepened, and in 1963, he co-founded the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU. ZANU was established with the primary goal of ending British colonial rule and achieving independence for Southern Rhodesia. The party advocated for armed resistance, believing that peaceful negotiations had failed to bring about meaningful change. Mugabe's commitment to the cause was unwavering, and his activism soon attracted the attention of the colonial authorities. In 1964, his activities led to his arrest and subsequent imprisonment. Mugabe was sentenced to a decade behind bars, a move aimed at silencing one of the most vocal leaders of the liberation movement. However, rather than being a setback, his imprisonment became a period of profound personal and political development. While in prison, Mugabe continued his education, earning several degrees through correspondence courses. This period of study not only enhanced his intellectual capabilities, but also kept him connected to the global political landscape. Mugabe's academic achievements while incarcerated were a testament to his resilience and determination. He obtained degrees in economics, education, and law, which further equipped him with the knowledge and skills that would later shape his political strategies. Moreover, Mugabe's influence within the nationalist movement did not wane during his imprisonment. He maintained communication with fellow activists and continued to be a guiding force for ZANU from behind bars. His writings and messages were smuggled out of prison, inspiring and directing the efforts of those still fighting on the outside. Mugabe's imprisonment galvanized the movement, turning him into a symbol. In the late 1950s, Robert Mugabe returned to Southern Rhodesia, a land rife with tensions and aspirations for freedom. The nationalist movement was gaining momentum, fueled by a collective yearning to dismantle British colonial rule and reclaim sovereignty. Mugabe, with his formidable intellect and revolutionary zeal, quickly immersed himself in the political fray, determined to be a catalyst for change. By 1963, the struggle had reached a critical juncture. Alongside other like-minded leaders, Mugabe co-founded the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU. This organization was established with a clear and uncompromising goal: to end British colonial rule through armed resistance and achieve independence for Southern Rhodesia. ZANU's formation marked a pivotal shift in the liberation movement, signaling a move from passive resistance to active confrontation. Mugabe's role within ZANU was central and highly influential. His eloquent oratory and strategic vision galvanized support and mobilized thousands. However, his increasing prominence also drew the ire of the colonial authorities. In 1964, his relentless activism led to his arrest, a deliberate attempt by the colonial government to quash the burgeoning resistance. Mugabe was sentenced to a decade in prison, a period meant to stifle his influence and break his spirit. Contrary to the authorities' intentions, imprisonment became a crucible for Mugabe, refining his resolve and expanding his influence. He utilized his time behind bars to further his education, earning several academic degrees through correspondence courses. This relentless pursuit of knowledge was emblematic of Mugabe's unyielding spirit. He obtained degrees in economics, education, and law, disciplines that would later underpin his political strategies and governance. Imprisonment did not diminish Mugabe's role in the liberation struggle. Rather, it amplified his stature. He continued to communicate with his comrades outside, often smuggling out letters and directives that kept the movement's leadership informed and inspired. These messages underscored his unwavering commitment and provided strategic guidance, ensuring that ZANU's efforts remained cohesive and focused. Mugabe's intellectual and ideological contributions during this period were profound. He used his writings to articulate a vision for a liberated Zimbabwe, emphasizing the principles of self-determination, economic independence, and social justice. His thoughts and ideas, meticulously penned from his cell, resonated deeply with those fighting on the outside, further solidifying his status as a central figure in the nationalist movement. Upon his release in 1974, Mugabe emerged not as a subdued former prisoner, but as a formidable leader ready to steer the final push for independence. His decade-long incarceration had transformed him into a symbol of resilience and defiance. Mugabe's time in prison, marked by continuous education and unwavering activism, cemented his role as a key architect of Zimbabwe's liberation, setting the stage for the dramatic and turbulent years that would follow. Narrator. After years of intense guerrilla warfare and mounting international pressure, Rhodesia finally gained independence on April 18, 1980. The country was renamed Zimbabwe, a name that evoked a rich cultural heritage and a new beginning. The inaugural celebrations were a historic moment, marked by joy and optimism, as Robert Mugabe, the leader of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, was sworn in as the nation's first prime minister. Mugabe's early years in office were characterized by a strong commitment to social development and nation building. Recognizing the need to heal a country scarred by years of conflict and colonial oppression, he focused on promoting education and healthcare. Under his leadership, the government implemented ambitious programs aimed at improving literacy rates and expanding access to medical services. Education became a cornerstone of Mugabe's policy. New schools were built, teacher training programs were expanded, and educational resources were distributed widely. These efforts paid off significantly, as Zimbabwe soon boasted one of the highest literacy rates in Africa. The healthcare sector also saw substantial improvements, with the construction of new clinics and hospitals, vaccination campaigns, and better access to basic healthcare services. These achievements garnered international praise and set Zimbabwe on a path to becoming a model for other African nations. However, this period of hope and progress was short-lived as political and ethnic tensions began to surface. The unity government formed between Mugabe's ZANU and Joshua Nkomo's Zimbabwe African People's Union, ZAPU, started to unravel. The two parties had differing visions for Zimbabwe's future and deep-seated mistrust from their history of rivalry during the liberation struggle. This tension escalated into a violent conflict known as the Gukurahundi. The Gukurahundi, which translates to the early rain that washes away the chaff, was a brutal campaign carried out by the North Korean-trained 5th Brigade against the Ndebele people, who were largely seen as supporters of ZAPU. From 1983 to 1987, thousands of Ndebele civilians were killed and many more were tortured, raped, and displaced. The massacres were an attempt to quell any opposition to Mugabe's rule and consolidate power, but they left a deep scar on the nation's psyche. Internationally, the Gukurahundi was condemned as a gross violation of human rights. Domestically, it sowed fear and division, undermining the social unity that Mugabe had initially sought to build. The government's brutal response to dissent exposed the darker side of Mugabe's leadership, revealing a willingness to use extreme measures to maintain control. Despite the horror of the Gukurahundi, Mugabe's grip on power remained unchallenged. In 1987, the unity agreement was finally reached, merging ZANU and ZAPU into a single party, ZANU-PF, and Como was appointed vice president. This political consolidation marked the end of the violent conflict, but also solidified Mugabe's authoritarian rule. The early promise of democratic governance and social progress was overshadowed by the realities of political repression and human rights abuses. The legacy of these early years is complex. While Mugabe's initial efforts in education and healthcare laid important foundations for Zimbabwe's development, the Gukurahundi left an indelible mark of violence and mistrust. It was a harbinger of the increasingly autocratic and contentious leadership style that would define Mugabe's later years in power, leading to further economic and social challenges for Zimbabwe. The downfall of Robert Mugabe's reign is a story of economic collapse, political turmoil, and ultimate resignation. By the 2000s, Zimbabwe's once promising economy was in freefall. The land reform program, which aimed to redistribute land from white farmers to black Zimbabweans, had backfired disastrously. The hasty and often violent land seizures led to a significant drop in agricultural production, a sector that was the backbone of Zimbabwe's economy. As a result, the country faced severe food shortages and unemployment soared. Hyperinflation reached unprecedented levels, peaking in November 2008 with an annual inflation rate estimated at 89.7 sextillion%. Basic commodities became scarce, and the Zimbabwean dollar became virtually worthless. People had to carry stacks of banknotes just to buy a loaf of bread. The economic meltdown caused widespread suffering and forced many Zimbabweans to flee the country in search of better opportunities. Mugabe's attempts to maintain power in the face of growing discontent led to increased political repression. Elections were marred by violence, intimidation, and allegations of rigging. The 2008 presidential election was particularly contentious, with widespread reports of voter fraud and brutal crackdowns on opposition supporters. Mugabe's main rival, Morgan Tsvangirai, leader of the Movement for Democratic Change, MDC, was forced to withdraw from the runoff election after a wave of violence against his supporters. Despite winning the election under dubious circumstances, Mugabe's hold on power was becoming increasingly tenuous. The international community, including Western nations and regional bodies like the African Union, began to apply pressure for political reform and respect for human rights. Sanctions were imposed, further isolating Zimbabwe and exacerbating the economic crisis. The tipping point came in November 2017. After decades of unchallenged rule, Mugabe faced an unexpected challenge from within his own party, ZANU-PF. Tensions had been building as Mugabe's wife, Grace Mugabe, appeared to be positioning herself as his successor, sidelining other party leaders and igniting a factional struggle. The situation reached a boiling point when Mugabe fired his longtime ally and vice president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, a move widely seen as an attempt to clear the way for Grace's ascension. The military, alarmed by the growing instability and the prospect of a Mugabe dynasty, intervened. On November 14, 2017, tanks rolled into Harare and Mugabe was placed under house arrest in a de facto coup. The military, while insisting it was not a coup, took control of key state institutions and demanded Mugabe's resignation. Under immense pressure from the military, his own party, and a populace that had taken to the streets in massive protests, Mugabe's options dwindled. On November 21, 2017, after 37 years in power, he resigned. His resignation marked the end of an era that had begun with high hopes and ended in widespread disillusionment. The fall of Robert Mugabe was met with celebrations across Zimbabwe. People danced in the streets, hopeful for a new beginning after decades of authoritarian rule. Emmerson Mnangagwa, who had fled the country after his dismissal, returned to assume the presidency. He promised economic recovery, political reforms, and a new era of democracy. However, the legacy of Mugabe's rule left deep scars, and the challenges of rebuilding a fractured nation remained formidable. Mugabe's downfall was a dramatic conclusion to a complex and controversial political career. It highlighted the perils of prolonged power, the consequences of economic mismanagement, and the enduring resilience of a nation yearning for change. As Zimbabwe embarked on a new chapter, the world watched closely, hopeful yet cautious about the future of a country once hailed as the breadbasket of Africa. Robert Mugabe passed away on September 6, 2019, leaving behind a deeply divided legacy that continues to provoke debate and reflection. To some, he was a heroic figure who dedicated his life to the liberation and empowerment, literacy, and access to medical services. However, to others, Mugabe's legacy is marred by his later years of autocratic rule, economic mismanagement, and human rights abuses. The land reform program, intended to redress historical injustices, devolved into violent land seizures that crippled the nation's agriculture-based economy. This mismanagement led to hyperinflation, massive unemployment, and a severe decline in living standards. His government's brutal suppression of political opposition, epitomized by events such as the Gukurahundi massacres and the violent aftermath aftermath of the 2008 elections painted a picture of a leader who would stop at nothing to maintain his grip on power. The Gukurahundi, a dark chapter in Zimbabwe's history, involved the killing of thousands of Ndebele civilians by the 5th Brigade, a military unit trained by North Korea. These actions were intended to eliminate dissent and consolidate Mugabe's authority, but they left deep scars and a legacy of fear and division. This period of state-sponsored violence remains a stark reminder of the human cost of political power struggles. Mugabe's policies, particularly in his later years, also led to international isolation. Sanctions imposed by Western countries further strained Zimbabwe's economy and exacerbated the suffering of its people. His rhetoric, often laced with anti-Western sentiment, resonated with some who saw him as a defiant voice against neo-colonial. For more in-depth historical documentaries that explore the lives and legacies of influential figures and pivotal events. We value your feedback and suggestions, so let us know in the comments below what other historical figures or events you'd like us to cover in future videos. Whether it's the story of another revolutionary leader, a significant historical event, or an exploration of cultural and social transformations, your input helps us create content that is both engaging and educational. Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring,